It is time to talk about a sci-fi, fantasy, and weird title. We're doing a book review of Odd Thomas by Dean Koontz. Hey everyone, it is Shannon, and I'm super excited to be here today and to share with you my thoughts on Odd Thomas. This is a book that I read for my sci-fi, fantasy, and weird exploration, which is something I started back in 2016, when I recognized that although I love or consider myself someone who loves science fiction, fantasy, and was curious about what weird was, I wasn't reading a lot of works in those genres. So being the person that I am, I put together a list, and since then I have been working my way through it. Now, truth be told, this is not a title that was originally on my list. I added it after the fact, but I definitely feel like it makes sense to be on this list. I also, the project or the exploration has sort of like a twofold, goal, and one of which is to simply enjoy titles that are science fiction, fantasy, or weird, but also I want to gain cultural context on these works, how they relate to other works within the genres, read books that are, so it's a combination of classics, modern classics, zeitgeist titles, popular works, influential works, well-regarded works, so it's a whole different, and it can be from any time period, recent, or I think, I created the list in 2016, so it doesn't have anything that's after 2016, which is why I always want to read all of the books on the BookTube SFF Awards, because I think they started in 2015, so that's sort of my, not modern, but contemporary titles I read from that list, and then anything that's earlier from that I read from this list. So why have one project when you can have more? Okay, so Odd Thomas by Dean Koontz. This is the 36th title that I have read for my sci-fi, fantasy, and weird exploration. I am also reading it, just talking about projects, I am also reading it because it's urban fantasy, or at least one of the genres it falls into is urban fantasy, and I do kind of want to do an urban fantasy project, but it hasn't quite taken form yet, but I thought I would just get the ball rolling and read this one. It was published back in 2003, and it is the first of 7 books in the Odd Thomas series, and the Odd Thomas series is complete at 7 books. The genre is a bit hard to say. It does have elements, I would say, of horror, thriller, and urban fantasy, and I'm not sure, I think I ended up landing on that I would consider it more of a horror novel than anything else. But it doesn't have to sit in a genre box. It can be cross-listed. That's totally fine. This book is 446 pages long, and it took me 2.5 months to read it. I'll get into the why later, but 2.5 months. It feels so long. I ended up giving it a 7.5 out of 10. I did enjoy it, but I did have some reservations. There were some things that I found to be challenging. Once we get to 8 out of 10, then it's like, woohoo, I really enjoyed it. I loved it, all the things. 7.5 usually means it was good, and it is good. I'm not saying it's not good. It is a good book, but I had some things that I didn't enjoy, and then I had some reservations about some other things, so there were some challenges. So it can't get to an 8 with reservations, so you gotta call ahead for reservations. Okay, so anyway, first question I have for myself is, did I understand it? And I would say, yes, I did. I definitely understood this. It is not my first Dean Koontz, although it has been many, many years since I had read a Dean Koontz. I understood it. It follows the character of Odd, who is someone who can see ghosts, I guess, or things that have people and things that have passed on, things that are slightly otherworldly. He does take it upon himself. He does feel like it's a responsibility to help people pass on, bring to light if there was some injustice done to them, and those kinds of things. So he has a moral compass that tells him this, I should do this. And we also follow some other characters. His girlfriend Stormy. He has a mentor, P. Oswald Boone, or Little Ozzy, even though he is not little, which comes under the challenges, and also a sheriff, because he does also help out in like law enforcement, but in a sort of like on the sidelines way. So in a lot of ways, this really sets up to be something that I would normally read, but more so watch, because someone who sees more than what is in the world and tries to help people out, honestly, that is always a story that I'm going to be interested in, but more so in TV. When you get to it in books, especially when it is sort of more in the land of horror, it gets a bit challenging for me. This book definitely did get gruesome and descriptive, which I should have, like, it's a Dean Koontz novel. So like, like that should have, I shouldn't have been not expecting that. And then also because it's a horror novel, there are, not that this is the case for all horror novels, but there are really, heightened situations, awful things happening to people, and how those come about and what or who is responsible for them. Those are tough themes. So for me, like, my next question is, did I enjoy it? And there, not always, because that stuff was tough. And I forgot, how do I always forget? One of the challenges I had with this is that, and this is just personal, I have a hard time reading horror at night. And the majority of my reading I do at night. But this is not a book I wanted to read before I went to sleep. So that's why it took me 2.5 months to read it, because I would have to carve out moments in the afternoon or earlier in the day. Even early in the day, I didn't want to start my day necessarily with some, and not all the stuff is like gruesome horror. There's like all different kinds. And this includes one of the things I find the scariest, like, in the world. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something gruesome or descriptive or whatever. It can be an idea. So it was like, so, and that's a subjective thing. So that's a reactionary subjective thing. So, but I really did enjoy the character of Odd, and he is a bit odd. I can never quite put my finger on why his dialogue always felt a bit strange, like how he responded to things always felt a bit strange, but I enjoyed it. And that was a bit like, and it just kept me a bit off guard. Like it's weird because when I reflect back, it's like he does have this responsibility to people, and I said the thing about the moral compass, which must be true because he does do that, but he doesn't seem like, he also seems very much like a regular person. Like, he's not out to get gratitude. He certainly does not want fame, but he does feel like he should do the right thing. So to me, he actually feels, although his, like, how he interacts with people can be a little odd, he feels like a very regular person. So it's a weird combination of things in that, but there were some things that I didn't enjoy, as previously mentioned, some of the descriptive horror elements or just straight up scary elements. I did feel like there were some challenges in terms of Ozzy, like how they depicted him in terms of, I think now we would consider, or even still true at the time, like that it would be more of a fat phobic depiction, like to describe someone who is so large, he had a hard time getting out of the armchair, like what was he eating, like it just, like, I just feel like we have a sensitivity now that we would not describe a person in this fashion at all, hopefully. So, and it's amazing, it's only 17 years old, so, or maybe people do still write books describing people like that, I don't know, but it was a central point of focus of his character. And then there was some other stuff that maybe I'll have to leave for a spoiler zone about the format of the book, because it's written in first person, and Ozzy, like, this is like page 2, like, tells him to write this book to us, the reader. So that is pretty, like, there's books that are in first person all the time, but this is very much Odd telling me, if I'm like this, or telling you, if you're reading it, talking to you, which is cool, and it creates this sort of, like, closer connection to him as a character, and you definitely feel more invested in the story. But because he's sort of being pushed into doing this, there is also resistance in him, and then it feels a bit icky for us. So, but it is an interesting writing device. Now, I don't know how or if that continues in terms of tension level as the books progress, but, and I can't get into more about that without going into spoilers, but it's an interesting take on things. Often first person can be like diary entries, entries or just changing perspectives all the time, but this is a bit unique, and at least I don't remember the last time, or if I've encountered it before, that someone's writing to us. Oh no, oddly, I think the Mistress Files, which is a book within the original Sinners, is like that. By Tiffany Reisz, which is an erotica short story collection. I think that's also the same format, so I don't know what that says. But anyway, so yeah. So and my next question is, was it what I expected? And I think no. Even though, was it urban fantasy? Yes, because it was our world, but there was more. It was in a city-ish. It felt city-ish. There was a mall. Is that what defines a city? That's what defines a suburb. I don't know. Like, it was urban fantasy. It does fall into what I consider urban fantasy. It is current day set or historical urban fantasy. It also exists like Jacoby, but it's set in the real world. There are elements beyond what we understand or know or take for given as a given, and but it's still centered in this world. So I do think it's that. But tonally, I would say this is more of a horror or a thriller novel. I don't feel like it's quite fast-paced enough to be a thriller. There definitely were chapters where I was like, oh no, I have to figure out what's going on next. So it does have a bit of a thriller pace, but I would put this in horror just in terms of the level of emotional impact from the horrific events that happen, and how this sort of scare factor I found, which is again subjective, for me that made it feel more as a horror. If you've read this, I'd love to hear what you consider it in terms of genre, but as I mentioned, we don't have to peg genre boxes, and it can be in more than one genre. I just find it an interesting way to discuss a work. So yeah, I'm still like, it's just one of those ones that it just sort of was a bit like not what I expected. It took me longer to read, but I did enjoy elements of it. I like the character of Odd a lot, but some of the gruesome stuff and the story stuff, like, I was like, whoa, I don't need those ideas in my head. I don't like it just felt too close, especially maybe because it's first person. So yeah, so I'm actually now going to go into the spoiler zone. So let me know if you have read Odd Thomas. Did you enjoy it? Did you read the whole series? I have reservations about continuing the series just because it took me so long to read this one, and like reading, I wouldn't read it at night and again and all of those things. So I'm trying to decide whether I would read more from the author. Like, I have read from Dean Koontz before. I read Lightning long time ago, and I loved that. And I think he mostly writes standalones. He doesn't have tons of series. I think this is his longest series. So I don't know. I don't know if I want to continue the journey. I might check out, there is a film. It's on Amazon Prime here in Canada, so I might check that out. But I am undecided on if I will keep going, because it just has like one too many challenges against it, even though it was a really interesting work. Okay, so that's going to leave that off, and I'm now going to go to the spoiler zone to some things about this work, and mostly I would have to say it was all of the, so really I'm going to spoil stuff, like really stuff that you don't find out until the end. But mostly it was I didn't pick up on the fact that in a way this is an unreliable narrator kind of situation, in a weird way, which I wouldn't expect from like first person. Like the whole like Ozzy getting him to write it, I never really figured out why he made him do that, so maybe that's not even a spoiler. But there was a moment where you're like, so he's future him telling us the past. He literally does say that he evaded this or was creative with that to misguide us. So that kind of didn't work for me. And mostly it was surrounded, and this really is the ending, mostly it surrounded Stormy. But I did pick up on the fact that, that she didn't make it. So I was kind of feeling like that's the direction it was going to go, even before the scenes where that would have been clear. And the end of this was like, wow, like I'm glad that I read it all in one go, because it got really intense really fast, with the whole like bombs and blowing up the mall and people with the guns. And oh, I should have said a trigger warning for that. Oh, that's a bit of a spoiler too, but like the attempted mass shooting, there were some mass shooting, like all of that. And this was from 2003, so I don't, that might, well, Polytechnique was before that, but so that was big. And then I was really not expecting that it was like, and I wasn't clear on whether they were Satanist or not Satanists, or they thought Satanism, like playing as Satanism would be an easy way to get marks, like the guy, the fungus man, like because he had money. I was like, so I am always disappointed when the resolve is that it was pretty much evil humans. And that even if they were Satanists, they are human. So even if their spiritual religious beliefs were Satanism, they're still human. So it's not necessarily, that's not paranormal. Like the Bodogs, those were, and the ghosts were, but the people who were mostly involved in the horrible things in this one were human. And I wasn't expecting that, especially given Odd's gift. So that was a bit disappointing. But on that hand, I didn't pick up on that. I picked up on Stormy. I guess I'm better at recognizing relationships and writing quirks in terms of relationships. I am horrible at picking up the mystery. I always think it's the last person the person talked to. Always. I'm like, it's them. No, I'm never going to pick it up. And I actually don't know, like, I didn't even consider classifying this as a mystery because I don't think there was enough breadcrumbs, but I'm not the best person to say that. So I'm curious as to the rest of the series, whether it is sort of mystery based, like whether you could pick it up, or if it's more thriller. So, and I'm curious about where Odd goes without Stormy, or what. It was sad. I was very emotionally touched by the end of this. I will say that. And I wasn't expecting that. So maybe I do need to know what happens to Odd just from a character perspective more than a plot perspective, which is unusual. So anyway, there are my thoughts about Odd Thomas. A special shout out to Amy from Zoe Beck. It was one of her videos from a while ago about urban fantasy that inspired me to add Odd Thomas to my sci-fi fantasy and weird list, as well as start to work on this urban fantasy project, which I don't know what it's going to be. So thank you so much, Amy, for talking about this in that video. And also we talked about it a little bit on social media here and there. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the book, and anyone who watched this far into the video, their thoughts on the book, and any advice, not any spoiler-free advice on continuing the series, because on the fence there. So there you go. There are my thoughts on Odd Thomas by Dean Koontz. I will be back soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.